President Duterte is boarding the plane again and going towards Beijing, China, to attend the One Belt, One Road, or the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative in Beijing. And President Duterte is, in this pivot to China, engaging this giant neighbor of ours, which has led to a great deal of advantage and benefit for the Philippines, including the $25 billion investments, $1.7 billion purchase order for fruits and foodstuffs from the Philippines, and millions of grants for bridges across the Pasig River to alleviate the traffic in Metro Manila, to start with 2 bridges across Binondo to the port area and between Makati and Mandaluyong. Irrigation and the train irrigation, the Chico Dam irrigation or reservoir, as well as the $3 billion train south route of the north-south train or railroad, which will start with at Tutuban and all the way down to Naga. But some people do not like this progress being made, and as I described earlier, insist on pursuing what they call lawfare, or yung labanan sa batas, which of course in the Philippines we know as a continuing problem for the people, both in civil cases and in this case, our national geopolitical situation. What is lawfare? President Duterte has kept warning that he does not want war with China or anybody, which this kind of lawfare would lead to. Solita Monsod in the Inquirer wrote a column saying lawfare is not warfare. Is this correct? In Tagalog, itong pagbabangayan ba sa batas daw ng UNCLOS, ng arbitration panel, ng Permanent Court of Arbitration, this will not lead to warfare, sabi ni Solita Monsod, or Solita Monsod says. Well, let us clarify this. That is why I wrote an article entitled Welfare versus Lawfare, because what President Duterte is doing is concentrating on the welfare, W-E-L-L, fair, instead of the lawfare, which actually is warfare. Why do I say this? Well, let us take a look at, of course, taking off from the Inquirer of April 30, 2017, the column of Solita Monsod entitled Lawfare is not warfare, attempting to justify the continuation of the campaign to press the decision of the Permanent Court of Arbitration. Ganyan din po, and that is also the track of Associate Justice of the Supreme Court, Antonio Carpio, which we will expand later on, since Carpio launched his book on the South China Sea controversy. Here is a quote from Joel P. Truckman from the Comparative Law Review of Boston, Boston College, International and Comparative Law Review. Basahin po natin. Let's read it. Current military campaigns are not waged solely on the physical battlefield, but in multiple other arenas. One such arena is lawfare. Warfare and lawfare is part of warfare. This is what Joel Truckman is saying. Let's continue. Legal activity that supports, undermines, or substitutes for other types of warfare in today's law-rich environment with an abundance of legal rules and legal fora, strategists must evaluate the full scope of possible legal argumentation. Lawfare can substitute for warfare, where it provides a means to compel a specified behavior with fewer costs than kinetic warfare. Of course, they use these fancy words, kinetic warfare. Kinetic warfare simply means real warfare with guns, cannons, missiles, and so on. But he's saying that lawfare can substitute for this while it can still enforce certain behavior. And he continues, or even in cases where kinetic warfare would be ineffective, as a result, lawfare can be strategically integrated into military command structures to bring about desired income. In other words, for those who prefer explanation in Tagalog or in Filipino, sinasabi ni Joel Truckman, yung kasuhan pwedeng bahagi ng gera, habang hindi pa kinakailangan yung physical na gera. Yan ang iniiwasan ni Presidente Duterte. Because sabi nga niya, walang pakinabang ang Pilipino dyan. Okay. So, let's continue. But why did lawfare come about? Because from the time of Marcos, sa panahon ni Marcos, he engaged with China and revived the diplomatic relations between the Philippines and China. Panahon ni Cory, in the time of Cory, Cory visited Deng Xiaoping and continued with this engagement through Fidel V. Ramos, and Presidente Estrada was very close to President Jiang Zemin, and it continued with Gloria Macapagal-Arroyo. Si Gloria Macapagal-Arroyo nagpirmahan ng Joint Marine Seismic Survey Understanding. So, paano pumasok ang lawfare o itong pagkakasuhan? Pumasok lang ito. This came about with the announcement in November of 2011 from President Obama at that time that the U.S. was going into the pivot to Asia. Anong ibig sabihin ng pivot to Asia? Pipihit ang Estados Unidos at ang kanyang 60% na kanyang military ay ililipat sa Asia na naman. Magwi-withdraw sa Middle East at ibang mga lugar. Anong kahulugan nun para sa Pilipino? So the pivot to Asia announced in November of 2011 by Obama was the announcement that 60% of U.S. military forces would be redeployed to Asia, withdrawn from other places like the Middle East and so on, and placed in Asia. And what is the reaction of China, the rising power in Asia? Of course, this felt like a threat to China, and this is confirmed. Ito, kumpirmado ito na talagang gustong gipitin ng Estados Unidos doon sa anunsyo ng pivot to Asia ni Obama. Ito ay kolumnista. This is a columnist from Bloomberg, Ellie Lake, a Bloomberg View columnist. He was the senior national security correspondent for the Daily Beast and covered national security and intelligence for the Washington Times, the New York Sun, and United Press International. And what does he say in the first paragraph? Does anyone remember President Barack Obama's pivot to Asia? This article was in October 22, 2016, after the arbitration award, and then after President Duterte won the elections and announced the independent foreign policy and visited President Xi Jinping. Ellie Lake asked, does anyone remember President Barack Obama's pivot to Asia? The plan was to focus diplomatic and military assets in East Asia to contain a rising China. Para paligiran ng China. Yan, malinaw. It is very clear here. And this is just an example of the many writings and reactions from the American intelligentsia. So it was really to contain China, and it's natural that China would react, and the Philippines stepped right in between. Pumagitan ang Pilipinas dito sa girian ngayon ng Estados Unidos at Pilipinas. At yung lawfare, yung pangangaso ng pangangaso tungkol dito sa mga teritoryo daw and so on. So lawfare was really part of a plan. It was one of the reasons Obama said he was shrinking the American footprint in the Middle East. So, magwi-withdraw sila sa Middle East. So, yan. The next frame shows, nagsimula na. The UN Arbitral Tribunal starts hearing on the Philippines case versus China. Okay, who represented the Philippines? U.S. lawyers for Philippine expert in maritime boundary cases, American lawyers in the UN Arbitral Tribunal. They call it the UN Arbitral Tribunal, but later on we'll see it is not a UN institution. Now, did you see the U.S. lawyer for Philippine expert in maritime boundary cases? It was the U.S. always at the helms of this case. And the Philippine Foreign Secretary, who was the one who initiated this filing, is also an American. Former DFA Secretary Albert Del Rosario is a green card holder, if not actually an American citizen. He does not even speak straight Tagalog or Filipino. So it created a lot of controversy. There were a lot of questions about it, which the Philippine press did not highlight, but indeed, this was a question. Spotlight says, or asks, Manila's expenses for South China Sea arbitration should be made public. Magkano ginastos ng Pilipinas dito sa kasong ito? Wala pong sagot dyan. And what does the international community says, including the legal community, international legal community? From the International Court of Justice, the sources said, which we will identify in a while, the United Nations International Court had no role in the Philippines case. The International Court of Justice did not have anything to do with this case. Let's continue. The arbitral court is not a United Nations agency. It is not a UN agency. Now, this came out in Asian News Network. We have, following this, a report which was reproduced in the, this is a Reuters report. That is one of the examples of the reports that the UN International Court, the ICJ, was not part of this case in the Permanent Court of Arbitration. And then the next slide, Tribunal on South China Sea Disputes, not primary judicial branch of the United Nations, says ex-International Court of Justice Judge Koroma, Abdul G. Koroma. He's a retired justice. Of course, the active justices could not speak on this, so it had to be a retired justice of the International Court of Justice. And there's more. Again, Abdul Koroma, former judge of the International Court of Justice, was very active explaining this because he also said emphatically, the arbitration and the processes of the International Court of Justice is not meant to create more conflict, but to resolve conflicts. Okay, so Justice Koroma figured very prominently in explaining these things, but the reportage in the Philippine mainstream media was very limited. Again, in summary, the PCA, Permanent Court of Arbitration, is not a UN body, never was a permanent court, did not do any arbitration, as its process was entirely unilateral in this case. So itong lawfare ay kanilang nagawa, halo na, false history, false promises, pati fake news. This lawfare was conducted with the support of false history, false promises, fake news. Let's go on. Isa sa talagang proponent, one of the major proponents of lawfare, and up to now he's very aggressive pushing this lawfare, is Associate Justice of the Supreme Court, Antonio Carpio. So he made false promises to the people. If you will recall, in 2015, 2016, sabi ni Carpio, ande, susunod ng China, kahit na nireject ang China na mag-participate, even if China repudiated participation in the PCA, Permanent Court of Arbitration, it will be forced to comply. Mapipilitan yan sumunod. reportage in local and Western media of the UNCLOS provisions practically effaced or hindi binanggit or erased Article 298 on the option against compulsory arbitration that China invoked. A provision that the Philippines also used before it signed on to the UNCLOS. So this is a legitimate act of China, which it brings out whenever it explains, and people accuse it of being of not respecting the law, and they explain this that they follow the rule of law because it is part of the UNCLOS, this Article 298, where the states can choose what form of arbitration and resolution, and one of them is dialogue and bilateral negotiations. Yet, we kept on insisting, because of our DFA before with Del Rosario, that the only way is compulsory arbitration. And again, Tony Carpio and Justice Carpio kept repeating, China, like US in an old case, will comply with the ruling. What is this old case? This old case is the Nicaragua versus the United States of America. In this case, Nicaragua, under the Sandinistas, filed a case in the International Court of Justice, ICJ. Hindi nga sa not in a non-court like the PCA, Philippine Permanent Court of Arbitration, but in the actual UN court, the International Court of Justice. And the ICJ decided in favor of Nicaragua, but the US never complied. But Justice Carpio kept saying that the US complied. In many forums, the US complied. This is an outright lie by Justice Carpio. Nagsinungaling si Carpio para ma-engganyo ang mga tao na lumaban dito sa legal argument daw kasi mapipilitang sumunod ang China. China has not complied up to this time and was willing to go to great extents to deny this PCA, or Permanent Court of Arbitration. And this is from an American writer, Peter Lee, writing in Asia Times. The US had made it clear from the beginning in this article, no off-ramps, only dead ends in the South China Sea, what he's referring to in the South China Sea arbitration. Because the only non-dead end is bilateral dialogue or talks with China. The US had made it clear from the beginning, it wanted the ICJ ruling canned. Gusto ng US na ibasura yung case ng Nicaragua versus US. When Chamorro's government was deemed stable enough, the Sandinistas lost and Chamorro, which is a US ally, won. Chamorro's government was deemed stable enough to support this unpopular move. The demand got moved to the front burner. The US slow walked on the aid it had already allocated but not yet disbursed, and apparently linked repudiation of the ruling provision of the US good offices to restore Nicaragua's standing as a qualified international borrower. Now, what happened? Nicaragua, with Chamorro, was forced to repeal the law that demanded the compensation from the US before the US restarted its aid for its ally government, Chamorro. So the US never complied. And up to this day, Justice Antonio Carpio has not clarified this because it is not seemly for an associate justice of the Supreme Court to be called a liar, which we are calling him. So let's continue. In a very memorable interview of Jessica Soho in GMA7 with Justice Carpio, this was repeated very often. And Justice Carpio was saying this legal fight will take generations, maybe 3 generations. And Jessica Soho asked him in Tagalog, after 75 years may matitira pa ba sa atin? Kung dumaan ng 75 taon ng kasong ito, tuloy ang legal issue, baka wala nang matira sa atin. So I think that is wiser than what the Supreme Court Justice, Associate Justice Carpio has been proposing. which is what Duterte has been doing. Negotiating, engaging, befriending, and gaining so much from this engagement with China. Lawfare, fake news, and fake sources. Etong nakaraang Asian Summit, this past Asian Summit, we saw so much fake news. And we will now show you 3 examples of this, of maybe dozens upon dozens of fake news that came out. So, ano itong mga fake news? Tulad nitong headline. Like this headline, it says, Philippines urged to raise legal win versus China during the ASEAN Summit. But let us look who these people urging the legal win to be pressed against China. The matter was brought up during the informal discussions before representatives of the ASEAN were scheduled to resume drafting the document, said a Philippine official who spoke on condition of anonymity. Totoo ba yung may nagsabi niyan? Hindi nila ina-identify. Hindi lang po itong, it is not only in this report. In the next report, we have the same thing. China is lobbying daw. China lobbying, how the ASEAN statement evolved. But again, if you look at the quotes, the lobbying is quite intense. China want to further water it down. One diplomat told Agence France-Presse. One diplomat. Sino yan? Who is that? Another example. This is by Manuel Mogato and Martin Petty of the Reuters. Push for South China Sea Code stirs ASEAN suspicions about Beijing's endgame. Parang napakasama ang Beijing. But when we read it, the ASEAN diplomat, no name, said the 2 rounds of talks so far this year gave the impression of progress, blah, blah, blah. Pero no name. Second paragraph, another diplomat from the 10-member bloc said the framework would be restating, blah, blah, blah. Another diplomat, no name again. And of course, they quote the usual sources identified with the Center for Strategic and International Studies like Richard Heydarian, who calls China as an aggressor instead of a claimant, as the Philippines is also a claimant, because if you use aggression, then Vietnam, the Philippines has been aggressors before in claiming since 1975 and occupying many islands and so on. So the objective term to use is that these are all claimants. So who was very aggressively lobbying? It was people like Albert Del Rosario, like this headline from the Philippine Star. Del Rosario urges government, don't wait for a better time to assert arbitral award. Roddy wrong not to raise arbitral ruling at summit. Then, what is the truth? Nobody raised these issues because the only people of real interest, with real interest in this issue was the Philippines, and President Duterte has denied his desire to even bring up this issue because he says it's irrelevant to ASEAN, it's between China and the Philippines. And Vietnam in January of 2017, as reported by the Voice of America here, Vietnam signals softer stance on contested South China Sea. That is why you did not hear anything from Vietnam during this ASEAN summit. Yet our Philippine press, mainstream press, kept on insisting that there was a lot of confusion, suspicion, pressure being exerted by some members of ASEAN. That is not borne out by the reality. So what is lawfare? Lawfare is suffering. During the lawfare years of 2015-2016, huge losses of 120 million pesos per week for Filipino banana exporters. The Mindanao Banana Farmers and Exporters Association were in agony. Tourism crashed during that period. But after October 2016, the visit of President Duterte to President Xi Jinping, the country went into economic high gear because welfare, yung kabutihan po ng tao, is a war against poverty by doing everything to promote economic development and prosperity for the Filipino people. Focused on the Asian way of harmonious dialogue and consensus building, eschewing or avoiding litigious. Litigious, ibig sabihin po yung yung kasuhan ng kasuhan. litigious engagement that create tension and misunderstanding. Welfare is war against war, and warfare against lawfare. The recent ASEAN summit conclusion is a victory of Asia and ASEAN over Western interference and lawfare. And now President Duterte is traveling to China to attend the One Belt, One Road, because that means peace and prosperity for us all. Okay, that's our message for this week in Journeys, the Chronicles of our Asian Century. Thank you very much.